Comcast is proud to sponsor the Texas Tribune Bridging the Digital Divide conversation. Comcast supports digital literacy learning through technology labs, online training for jobs, and our low-cost Internet Essentials program. We hope that you enjoy today's very important discussion, and thank you for being here.
Please give our distinguished panelists a hand, please. Good to have you all here. Mr. Reed, let me begin with you. I was so interested in reminding myself about some of the relevant facts on the degree to which we have a digital divide in this state that I read both current stuff and also went back and read some archival stuff. So this is in January of, according to stuff I read this year, in January of 2015, pardon me, we discovered through a publication that more than 4 million mostly rural households in Texas cannot access broadband with speeds that meet the FCC's new goal for connectivity, which I think is 25 Mbps download and 3 Mbps upload. I think I have that right. I went back actually 15 years, and there was a report from the Public Utility Commission that was complaining about high-speed access to the internet is increasingly seen as important for rural Texas. It's like we've been talking about this over time, and the problem doesn't seem to have improved.
That is correct.
Why? What is the genesis of the problem, and why has the problem not been sufficiently addressed?
That is not a question I was expecting.
Well,
but let me try.
You're the expert.
In rural Texas, we have a much less dense population, and providers in rural Texas have not been willing to spend the infrastructure dollars that they need, that are needed to deliver broadband to rural Texas. Give you an example of that. My family has a small farm in central Texas, and there is a fiber optic line going right down the highway that is adjacent to our farm, and broadband connectivity is not available in that particular community. It's because that's a connector between major cities, but it's not a connector for the rural community. So my sense is that providers have not been willing to expend the dollars that are necessary to provide broadband in those communities.
It's the case, Representative Wu, that for those providers, they think they get a bigger bang for their buck serving more heavily populated areas. I came upon a quote from a provider up in Grayson County, North Texas, who said, "Why would I do work wiring up a community of 100,000 when I could go down to Dallas and wire hundreds of thousands of people in one city? Why would it be useful for me?" So in some respects, the need may be there, but it's just not good business for the providers to go into those communities.
Well, okay. Of course, I mean, it's, I think for all the providers out there, there has to be a business model for it. There has to be a business case for it. If you can't justify it, why would you do it? And I think this is a remnant of our past of having connectivity, and connectivity in the past was phone lines, and that was a utility, and that was a government utility, and the government helped put that in. And now we've gone to the internet, and there was a cross between when the internet was the phone line for a while, when we were on 280 modems, right? How many people are old enough to remember that?
There are a few here that
not
remember
many,
that.
some, right? Yeah.
I remember that.
So, the broadband was basically born in the era of deregulation. So we've not had the government-supported infrastructure that, let's say, a lot of other first world countries have had.
Right.
You go to Korea, you go to Japan, you go to Europe, you go to anywhere that's a first world country. Broadband is a government utility.
Right.
It's heavily supported by government because they understand the value of what it means for their entire citizenry to be connected.
Right.
Now, I think one of the big things is, I think we have a very different makeup than a lot of other countries. You look at Asian countries, you look at European countries, they're very concentrated in the big cities, and there's not a lot of let's say, rural areas.
Right. So the disbursement of our population may be part of the issue, but
Yeah.
I like what you said, Representative Wu. The fact is that we don't consider the government to be, or the government doesn't consider itself to necessarily be in the business of providing the service. They may recognize the value of it, but they're not going to provide it.
And that's not, may change because the recent ruling FCC ruling that internet is a utility.
Right.
The FCC Lifeline program.
Exactly.
Right.
So, but there's still a question of money. Just because they consider utility is, are they going to put the money?
Are they going to necessarily put the resource in?
Right.
Ms. Garlick, in your capacity running the Blinn College campus in Schulenburg, you're focused on essentially the argument that we're hearing from Representative Wu and Mr. Reed, that there is an economic development aspect to this, that people who have access to broadband in rural communities can get education and they can get workforce training or skills that would make it possible for them to do better for themselves and by extension for their communities and for the state. And in the absence of those things, they're sort of trapped. That's been the focus of your work out there. Would you talk about how you view this issue from that perspective?
Well, we're lucky in Fayette County because we actually worked with an organization called Connected Texas. And Connected Texas was a provider that helped connect those internet service providers with businesses and with education in our area.
In fact, it was a program, I think it's no longer operational, but it was a program out of, appropriately, the Department of Agriculture, because it was
That's
focused in large part on trying to rectify the inequity in rural parts of our state.
Yes. So we were very lucky that we had our city leaders, our county leaders, our business leaders all work together
Right.
with that and actually help to better connect our county. And we actually are now one of the third counties in Texas that's considered a connected county.
Right.
So we're very fortunate that we were proactive in that area, and we are working diligently to try to continue educating the citizens in our area, because we feel that a better educated citizenry will attract more businesses to our area, and we're very interested in attracting business in our area.
Right. And disproportionately, as we say, rural households may have less access than other households in Texas to this service. And of course, you hear at the school level, well, mobile phones are going to solve the problem that broadband access in the house won't solve. But the reality is, if you're a kid and you've got homework to do, you've got to have access to a broadband in your house, presumably, to be able to be as good at your work as you would want to be. Mobile phone's not going to solve that problem, right? There's a myth that mobile phones are somehow solving the problem of lack of access to broadband.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to type a research paper on a mobile phone?
Right.
Not
I've
easy.
actually seen a kid do that, but it
Right.
wasn't easy.
So again, I said there were more than 4 million mostly rural households in Texas that have no broadband access now. In the last 4 years, there's been an increase in the number of homes in Texas that have broadband access. More than 1 million additional homes have access. It's like an increase of 12% over a 4-year period. But the numbers in Texas, Ms. Budd, the population is changing before our eyes. We're at 27 million. Our population is going to double in size by 2050. Many of the places in which the population is growing are places that probably don't have that social infrastructure. We have a long way to go.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really interesting, we may be talking about rural, but also in Austin, which is the new Silicon Valley,
Right.
probably 87 to 92% of the households are wired, but you still have the underserved population, and that group that we serve is not connected. And that's the tragedy of it all. We see this big boom, and then you look at the divide, and we don't want to become like a third world country where it's the haves and haves not.
Now, the parts of Austin, Ms. Budd, that you say, we think Austin is so, the live broadband capital of the universe, however you want to kind of take its branding and translate it. The reality is a percentage of Austin is not wired. We talked before this, Mr. Reed, the percentage of Houston.
25% of Houston is not connected.
25% of Houston is not connected.
Over 50% of Houston that has household incomes below 35,000 is not connected.
Well, let me come to that. So Houston is the 4th trending to be the 3rd largest city in the country. Austin's MSA is now 11th. In fact, we have 4 of the 11 largest MSAs in the country right now, according to the census. And yet, even in those big cities where you would expect this would not be a problem, I mean, Schulenburg is one thing, but you would expect it would not be a problem in the big cities, and yet that's the case. And Ms. Budd, what Mr. Reed alluded to is the thing. It's low income. It's a socioeconomic disparity, so that the lower income areas of Austin are the ones that are less likely to be served.
Absolutely. And then we also find, when you talk about low-income people and housing situations, there's a real struggle between paying electric and gas and internet, and we're trying to educate people about the value of the internet, but
Right.
then how do we pay for it? How do we sustain it? And talking about it becoming a utility, it's just like electricity was, back in the old days, if you
Right.
will.
Well, in fact, very specifically, the Dallas Federal Reserve did a study on this subject earlier this year, in which Joanna Barton of the Dallas Fed said specifically, digital access is the new electricity. So any suggestion that somehow this was an optional thing, to Representative Wu's point, we need to begin thinking about it almost as a utility.
Well, and I think one of the things that I think really need to consider, it's not just school papers. I think the bigger
Right.
issue is you can't participate in government.
Jobs.
Jobs. Nowadays, almost, I haven't applied for a job in a while, but even 5-6 years ago when I was applying for jobs, they didn't accept physical applications.
You had to submit something electronically.
You have to submit something electronically,
Right.
but that's not.
80% of Fortune 500 companies require online
Right.
application.
80%, you said 80% of
And
Fortune 500 companies.
Even our
require.
state, sometimes as much as we complain about our government's actually pretty ahead of the curve in terms of
Very much online.
On online applications. But the problem with that is now they're saying because online applications are so efficient, we're no longer providing physical copies of this form.
So if you're one of those people who falls into the seam here, Representative, and you don't have access to broadband.
You literally cannot get government services and cannot participate.
Right. And of course, on the business end of this, if you're a community outside of the big cities and you want to attract business or keep entrepreneurs who might want to start a business, the lack of access, Ms. Garlick, to broadband is going to be a determining factor.
Absolutely.
The tech startups that may want to do it in a small town somewhere and don't have sufficient access to broadband, it's in the same way that a big company doesn't want to come someplace that doesn't have easy access to an airport, right? This is a prerequisite for the business community or the economic development aspirations to be achieved.
Absolutely. We think that it will help our community attract more business. We are located in a wonderful area at the intersection between I-10 and 77. So what better place to start a business, but when they start checking on the resources available there, that is a deterrent.
Right. Sir.
Now there is this one thing that I don't know if that is a disagreement or not, but I actually think that cellular networks are actually a very good answer to a lot of the issues, especially in small communities.
Explain.
So the real expense that we're talking about is the expense of physical wiring. You got to go dig a ditch to somebody's house,
Right.
or to hook it up on a pole or something. I think in some smaller communities that maybe they're not too far apart, if you have a cell tower, I think we're thinking about cellular networks as only being on our phone, but you can have a 3G or 4G hotspot, and you can have your computer hooked up to that hotspot.
To your phone.
Right.
Yes.
To your phone. You either use your phone as a tether, or you can actually just buy a wireless hotspot device that only does data. And that is, I think, is because you can have a further reach with a large cell antenna.
Right.
And it's been more practical to run one tower with a fiber optic line than it is to run, 3 or 4 dozen lines to houses.
Right. So this problem can be solved one way or the
I
other
think
way, but it can be
and I think
solved.
Small communities make a good test case to say, like, look, let's not do wired at all. Let's just do a completely wireless, a completely a cellular-based data network.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let me ask you, Mr. Reed, I alluded to this FCC goal for connectivity standard that has happened. Will you talk a little bit about, obviously the FCC is thinking hard about this. The president's talked about this. Various departments of the federal government, HUD and others are talking about the importance of connectedness. Would you?
Actually, the federal government executive office, President Obama's office, has created a new task force that is trying to connect all of the dots and all the various agencies that are doing things related to digital inclusion and connectivity and all of that to help organizations that are working in this field have access to resources, but also to deal with the more comprehensive solution to the problem, so that we don't have lots of silos doing one-off things.
Right.
So,
But of course, the federal government can only do so much.
Right,
It's going to, in a state like Texas, which hates on the federal government maybe as much as any other state, the fact that it may be coming from the federal government as a mandate or as a suggestion, they're often going to be told, talk to the hand.
Well, this is not a mandate of any type. What it is, it's a collaborative working together
Right.
of representatives of different programs.
Right, but at least the point is that at the federal level, there is some messaging about the importance of this.
That is correct.
And Ms. Budd, to the question of low-income areas of cities and connectedness, in fact, the Housing and Urban Development Department, which I alluded to, now has a program in place. Secretary Castro, former Mayor San Antonio, is very proud of this, in which public housing is now either obligated to or has the opportunity to have broadband as part of the services offered to low-income folks.
So we were very fortunate to be a part of the Connect Home initiative. It was a White
That's
House
what it's called, Connect Home.
And we were the pilot city, Austin, and we partnered with Google Fiber, the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, and there's many of social service organizations. Austin Freenet happens to be one of them. And so we discovered the model that it's a three-legged stool. You need a device, you need the internet access, and you need training. And that's where Austin Freenet comes in.
You're providing the training.
We're providing the training. And so we use this model, and each of the housing authorities residents went through a series of training. After the training, they got a free device, and then Google Fiber will provide internet access for 10 years to those residents. So we're eliminating all the barriers that are creating this digital divide as we know it, and creating this holistic approach to it. And so we're trying to use that model around the nation. And so the White House initiative that President Obama initiated, Connect Home, identified 26 cities and one Indian reservation to receive and participate in this program. We serve as a model. I've been to San Antonio to talk to them about the model, and
Right.
we're going around the country.
And separately, I believe, Technology for All and the work that you're doing at the Austin Freenet, somehow you are also recipients or managers of, executors of a fairly large, maybe the largest grant given by the Department of Commerce.
It wasn't the largest grant, it was the second largest.
pardon me.
Largest grant.
Who's counting?
Second to the city of New York.
Okay.
So we were the largest nonprofit recipient of
Largest nonprofit.
Broadband Technology Opportunities Grant, 9.6.
Another way in which the federal government is trying to provide the kind of resources that would enable you then to carry
And we were able to
all of
match
this
that
forward.
with
Right.
local dollars, about $8 million.
Ms. Garlick, let me ask you about two vertical slices of this conversation that I think are of particular interest in rural communities. One is the degree to which distance learning is becoming a thing. So as our population grows, and although we want all of our colleges and universities to accommodate as many students as possible, either lack of access to slots to admit students or simply the physical distance that some kids may have from the campuses that they would like to attend, more and more in higher ed, more and more students are having to take advantage of the opportunity that distance learning provides. Obviously, that's a case where the broadband access that they have is a direct determinant of whether they can succeed or fail in education. And that's been a focus of yours.
Absolutely.
Yeah, talk about that.
And depending on where a student lives, they may or may not have access. And when we think about distance learning, we think it's only online classes, but almost any class that you take now usually has an online component to it.
Right.
So students are required to submit their papers and watch videos and do homework, even in addition to the face-to-face class. We have students in our area, depending on where they live, who do not have access, those outside the city limits in some areas. So that definitely is a deterrent for them when classes have that online component and they do not have access.
So it gets back to this question of whether a lack of opportunity is a vicious cycle, right? Because if you don't have opportunity, you don't have access, then you don't get to break that cycle. It just basically perpetuates.
It's a growing opportunity gap.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Reed, you know, the fact is that in higher ed, you have informally these massive online open, is it open online or online open, but MOOCs, as they're called by acronym, classes that are available informally to people who want to take them that are free. And then within some of the university systems, the UT system particularly, they've got this edX initiative in partnership with Harvard, and I think maybe Rice is involved with this and a couple of others, in which you have the opportunity to take these really extraordinary classes that just a couple of years ago would never have been available to you. But again, a lack of access prohibits your ability to access that material.
Right. In fact, here in Houston, Houston ISD has initiated a program where they're giving laptops to students, one
Right.
laptop per child, and works great in communities where homes have broadband access, where families have been using tools like this for a long time. But in the community where our office is, for instance, 50% of the population in that community does not have broadband access, does not have any access
Right.
at home.
So
And
giving them a laptop is sort of a Pyrrhic victory.
It's a growing
right?
opportunity gap.
Right.
Yeah.
Representative Wu, another vertical slice of this that is of interest to me and I know was a topic of conversation at the legislature and is part of the interim charges that Speaker Strauss has put before all of you as you work between now and the 2017 session is telemedicine. Right. As the population of Texas grows, we have a problem with access to medical providers. And we hear a lot about how we don't have access to insurance. We are the state with the largest percentage and number of our citizens without health insurance. But the reality is, even if we flipped the switch and expanded Medicaid and gave everybody insurance tomorrow, we would not have enough doctors. We would not have enough providers. Telemedicine has been one of the things that has been floated as a way to help fill that hole. And yet, lack of broadband access in these communities means lack of access to telemedicine.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I haven't seen any of the numbers on that. I mean, I would think that most places, if the hospital would be able to find some way to connect, I think maybe for smaller rural clinics that would be a real issue.
Right.
But I would think that they would almost have they would have bigger problems.
Well, they have bigger problems, stipulated they have bigger problems. But what I'm thinking is if you're a patient in a rural area or in an underserved area, and you want to communicate electronically with your physician or with the hospital, the whole point of this would be that connectedness would make that possible, and a lack of connectedness would impede that.
I think, I mean, we can talk about everything in life that is now connected. I mean, like my household is on the verge of having our lights and everything else and a garage door hooked up to the internet, so I can just do it, close my garage door
With your phone.
My phone.
Right.
We can go through just a litany of things.
Yeah, it's almost every aspect of our lives that would be
Some of
affected
it
by
is like very first world problems.
Right.
But some of it is not. I mean, basic things like medicine, education, access to government. And
Right.
Those things are not first world issues. Those are like basic
Well, I
services.
want to come back to access to government. Ms. Budd, you wanted to get into this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just want to jump in and say, you said it's the lack of access, but then you give people access and they don't know how to use it, and so we
Right,
have that secondary problem.
The second half of this is once you get the device or once
The
you get
device and the
access,
broadband and the
it's
skills.
not enough.
It's a three-legged stool that it's a holistic approach to this problem that we have. And if we give one without the other, you're not solving the problem at all. You're just perpetuating it.
So I've talked about the growth in population. Let me talk about the dynamic change in populations that is specific to Texas. So 27 million, as I said, double population by 2050, but we're becoming increasingly less white as a population. In fact, 2004, we became a majority population. We're soon going to be, within the next 10 to 15 years, Latino majority. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. So the Dallas Fed report that I alluded to earlier said that the McAllen-Edinburgh Mission Metropolitan Statistical Authority, MSA, down in the Rio Grande Valley, has the greatest digital divide among the nation's largest MSAs. Not just Texas's, but it is literally the least.
Number one.
It's
number
number
one.
one, that's right.
We like to be first and best at everything. I don't think crappy broadband access is what we had in mind, right? But so, anyway, McAllen-Edinburgh Mission is the number one MSA in the country from the standpoint of its digital divide. It has the lowest broadband subscription rate in the entire United States.
But Texas has 4 major cities.
Well, I was about to say separately, right? Laredo and the Brownsville-Harlingen MSAs, which are considered small as MSAs, are also near the top of that list.
But I think they're not looking at the colonias.
Well, the colonias probably are a whole other category.
Colonias,
right?
I'm not sure they have running water, much less
Let alone
internet
broadband access, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
so
still on
I
AOL
think
down
if
in the
they
colonias,
actually
right?
compared the colonias to that, it would be
Right.
that would be. I mean, that's literally the colonias on the borders of Texas. That's literally the poorest place in America.
In the whole country.
I mean, it's got the Appalachia beat by a mile.
Without a certainty. So, so just to put a couple of specific numbers behind this, I thought this was interesting. Percentage of households with a computer in Austin, and this is a computer, not access, computer, 92%. Laredo, 69%. Brownsville, Harlingen, 72%. McAllen-Edinburgh Mission, 76%. Then they have this index that's a regional computer gap. And so Austin is 0. Laredo is minus 23, Brownsville, Harlingen, minus 20, McAllen-Edinburgh Mission, minus 16. I suspect, Ms. Garlick, that the rural areas, you'd see a similar gap.
Probably.
Similar lack of access. So as the demographics of the state change, just as in a lot of other areas in which you would think of as social infrastructure, healthcare and education among them, where the new emerging majority populations are behind the rest of the state. areas where we've invested less, Representative Wu, this is going to increasingly become a problem as well.
And here's I think, an additional wrench in the machine is internet connectivity is not a static target.
Yeah.
If you have phone lines, like once you have the phone line, it's either, it's a 1 or a 0. You have it or you don't, and there's really not much upgrade to that. Problem is, everyone else's connectivity, if you give me a 3G phone right now, I throw it back at you.
Right.
Because, what do you want me to do with this? Because if I don't
Long
have...
ago, we gave up dial-up, right?
Right. So, the problem is, the communities that didn't have it 10 years ago are now just getting, essentially, let's say at best 3G speeds.
Right.
When we're moving to 5G next year, right? And they're constantly playing catch up, and not only are they constantly playing catch up, the gap is getting wider and wider because we're getting technology faster. Austin, it's Google Fiber. Houston would kill for Google Fiber.
Right.
Can you have something to do with that?
No, we've actually tried. We've actually asked. We begged and pleaded. The reason, actually, Houston was one. The rumor that I talked, let's say background information that was given was that Houston was considered a candidate for Google Fiber, but because of political wranglings and just atmosphere, culture, and whatever else, they decided to go with Austin.
Politics is everything,
Yeah.
right? You know that. But Ms. Budd, to Representative Wu's point, this is indeed true. The problem is not simply connected or not connected. It's that many of these areas, and I would add Ms. Garlick to this as well, whether it's rural areas or low-income areas in the big cities or some of the underserved communities in South Texas, say, what they get may not even be as good enough once they get it as what the other communities have.
Agree. Again, it's talking about the infrastructure and the cost of infrastructure. Who's going to provide that? Who's going to serve it? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to educate? Who's going to give devices, et cetera? Right. And so we do need to find solutions, and I think the government has to be a part of the solution because part of the government's responsibility or what the government has done is put things online, and then companies are moving online.
Right.
And so if their social service benefits are online, then how are the very people that you're trying to help going to get that access, and how are they going to get online to do that?
How are they going to access services?
Right.
So,
Now, Ms. Garlick, in rural Texas, there's almost nothing as scary as we're from the government and we're here to help. But in fact, some of the antipathy to government and what government provides may in fact be a route to a solution, if not a solution itself.
Yes.
Agree?
Yes, we got into the business, and you mentioned this a minute ago, because you were talking about people who couldn't fill out online job applications, which is exactly why we got into training our workforce there with computer classes, because we had people going into the public library, and the librarians were having to sit with them and help them complete applications or fill out online forms because they literally did not know how to use a computer at all. So that three-legged stool that Juanita was talking about was very important. So,
Well, and in fact, you bring up libraries. We haven't even talked about libraries yet, but in communities outside the big cities, say, libraries, it seems like kind of almost a quaint notion, the library, the community library. But in fact, in communities outside the big cities,
Yes.
libraries are the public square. They're the gathering place for the community. And for a lot of people who don't have access in their own homes, they will go to libraries to avail themselves of, right, Ms. Garlick, they'll go to libraries to avail themselves of broadband access there. Increasingly important if those libraries are the only options that those communities get access to what they need.
absolutely.
Right. Representative Wu, you talked about the government and the degree to which you can interact with government.
Yeah.
You were talking about applying for jobs. I was thinking about something else. We have a state of 27 million people. We have the worst voter turnout in Texas over the last 3 election cycles of any state in the whole
Tell me
country.
about it.
You know, but I know. I think you're probably safe to be
Congratulations.
reelected, but we'll see. So we have the worst voter turnout of any
I have the worst turnout district in the entire state.
You do? You have the I thought I was thinking based on this last year,
number
it had
one.
to be San Antonio.
You're number one.
It had to be San Antonio. You have the lowest voter turnout in your district of any state, of any district in the whole House.
In the entire
The
state.
entire Texas. Well, so you understand this. One of the things that a lack of access to broadband also does is impedes citizen engagement or civic engagement. How do citizens find out about the big issues that are affecting them and their communities? How do they find out about what candidates believe on certain issues? How do they find out about where they can go vote? Yeah. All of this, it actually affects, among everything else, it also affects informedness and it affects civic participation.
Yeah.
Right.
No, look, here's the thing. My district is an immigrant district. 40% of my district was not born in the United States. We have it's a middle class to down and further down, and we have people who, like two-parent households that work 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and we have the additional challenge. We have parents that tell their boys, "You're 14, you better leave high school, go get a job,
And go get to work."
And so so their question is, I don't understand what the need for education is, much less what do you do on the internet other than screw around? What is this for?
Right.
Right? Why do you need this?
Culturally, it's a leap for them to understand the value.
Right. And so it's like, well, look, you don't need to be on the internet. Go out there and go get a job in construction or whatever else it is, and just start making money. You don't have time to go screw around. Just,
Right.
That's the internet and all that stuff. That's for the rich white people, right? So
civic participation is sort of down the list of priorities.
It's very, very far down. I mean, like, you
Right.
look at Maslow's, pyramid of needs, and it's like, being engaged is going to be after you fulfill all your other needs.
Right.
And, especially in poor communities, it's just like, you have to fulfill other needs first.
Right.
And it's a cultural shift to engage people, to tell them, look, education is important, and therefore internet is important, but it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's where the relevancy and all this culminates into understanding how relevant and important it is to propel your kids to the next
Right.
level. And that's in our community, that how we communicate information. You may not be able to give them that $50,000 check that another legacy of people can give, but you can give them education, and education is that key. And if we show them statistically that households that are $35,000 and below typically don't have internet, yet the households with 75% and above of 90,000 plus. So what does that say to you? Does the internet helps? And so finding information that's really going to validate the reason for education and show them, because all of us want better for our kids, right? So validating that information and showing our communities that this is real, and try it out just for a week or so, could really help them, propel them to really engage.
Will, this feels like a Steve Murdoch slide in a PowerPoint, I'm sure, somewhere, but theoretically, we can show a correlation between broadband access, education level, and income.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, we can.
I mean, so to Juanita's point, there is a direct through line.
There is a direct correlation. In fact, over the neighborhood around our office with Rice University, we have a wireless network. And one of the things that happened as we provided free wireless network to that community is people began to realize this tool and the value of this tool that was free. And so many of the people that began to access the internet for free began to use it and discover there are things I can do here to improve myself, to access services, to engage with others, to connect with my family in another country. And so one of the things that's happened is that providers in the neighborhood are now selling connectivity to low-income families who now value that as a tool that is essential for life in today's world.
Right, but it was important for them to access it for free and to understand as users that it had value before they would then consider possibly dedicating dollars to the...
Once they experienced the value, then they bought it.
So we have about 5 or so minutes before I want to bring the audience into the conversation and ask questions. And I want to move away from acknowledging the challenges that we have to talking about solutions. So Representative Wu, you are one of 150 members of the House, 181 members of the legislature. You all passed a $209.4 billion budget for this biennium. Some priorities better funded than others. Was there money in the budget, or could there be money in the next budget to help address this problem? Or is this not a problem that the state and the capital can solve?
The optimistic side of me says, of course, there's money to address it. I mean, I'm going to be just a little bitter here. We gave DPS like $800 million to go buy new helicopters and speedboats to patrol the border and do whatever else. We could have spent $20 million of that to help connect rural areas. We didn't.
You say $20 million.
$20 million.
Would that have been enough?
You could do a lot with $20 million.
You could do a lot with 20 million.
Yeah.
So if you had put the House wanted a little bit more than 500 million on border security.
Yeah.
The Senate wanted
I guarantee
800 million.
we could have connected the 25% of Houstonians who were not connected.
Right.
to
Ultimately,
that
the
website.
Senate's number for border security, that's what you're referring to specifically, $800 million was. So if you had gone from 800 to 780 million,
Right.
and taken the other 20 million, you could have done some damage.
Yeah.
Right on that.
So I think the realistic political side of me would say that's not something that the state is going to spend money on.
Right.
As much as people know it's important, people know pre-K education is important.
Do you think the state is making an active decision or a passive decision not to fund greater connectedness?
It depends.
I'm asking you to look into the souls of the people you work with, is what I'm
And
asking
this is
you to
being
do.
recorded. This is live, right?
It is, yeah, yes.
Right, see, look into the
okay.
camera.
Yeah, if you want to say bad things about people you work with, we can just edit that out in post. Don't worry about it. Good.
No, look, it's for the most part active because look, you have a state that basically says we're we're for small government, we're
Low
for
tax, low service has been our brand
we're
for
low
some time.
regulation.
Right.
Look, if the government comes in and does stuff, that's regulation of some kind. That's government activity. That's government spending. And the argument always is, that the private industry should do that, and the free market should have its hand in it. It's like, but then you tell them, well, look, if you connect this rural area, it's their monthly subscription cost is going to be $600 a month for them to make it worth it for the company to come out to connect them.
Yeah.
And then when you make that argument, they're kind of like just kind of shrink away and pretend that they never said anything.
Right. It gets back to the question of whether it's worth their time
but
to
then
wire
when you
these
go up and
communities.
argue that point again,
Yeah.
saying, hey, we need money for this issue, they're like, well, why don't you let the market solve it? Like, well, we didn't just have this conversation.
Right.
So it is active in a sense, but it's also passive in that everyone pretends that there's no problem and pretends that it'll just get solved.
Therefore, there's no solution necessary. Well, Mr. Reed and Ms. Budd are working at organizations that are nonprofits, right? You're not a for-profit. And obviously, Austin Freenet's not a for-profit. In the absence of the government, to Representative Wu's point, actively deciding or even passively deciding we're going to solve this problem by allocating money, 20 million out of border security or whatever else, do you have enough resources available to you? And where should the resources come from if you don't to solve this problem?
I really think it's going to take a collaboration of public, private, non-governmental, governmental entities. If you look again at the model, and corporate sponsorship for sure, it takes a village for all of us to do well, right? And so I think if you look at the model that we've created in Austin with the Unlocking the Connection model, it's the corporations, the IBM, the Googles, they came together and saw a need. The city of Austin said, yes, this is an important need, and the social service entities like myself are benefiting from that by providing the training. It's a beautiful model, and I think it's an easy enough model to replicate.
So municipal government has to put in, but also big corporations that consider themselves to be good civic actors.
Actually, and if you have a lot of organizations doing it, the burden is not on one provider.
Right.
And if you invest in education, we are going to create new consumers for the corporations that are in the technology field.
Well, that gets back to Representative Wu. Where we invest in education first, we invest theoretically out of the legislature. So Ms. Budd's answer at the Austin Freenet level also works for technology for all.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So I challenge the Houstonians and all those listening to us to take a look at the model, and I challenge you to identify and contact one of us and just do a pilot program. Just throw a couple of $100,000 out and see what happens.
Now, Ms. Garlick, it's a little bit of a different calculation. You may not have the kind of deep-pocketed civic actors or kind of corporate actors, good civic citizens in Schulenburg, and you may also not have access to foundation support necessarily, but where do you turn then for the dollars that you need in the absence of the state putting in the absence of these big corporate supporters putting in? What do you do to fund the programs that you're doing?
Well, actually, for the past 3 years, we did get grant funding from the Texas State Library Association.
Okay.
They actually started our program because of the area residents who were not able to use a computer. We did that for 3 years. This year, we have a private foundation who's funding basic and advanced computer classes.
Great.
We also work
A
with
local foundation?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, we also work with our local city leaders. We are actively looking for additional grants to help fund some other projects that we have in mind.
Great. All right, let's ask if you have questions. We've got a microphone right here. We'd be happy to have you come up and join the conversation. Any of the topics we've talked about or any that we have not talked about. And we want to try to get at, if you would come up over here, that'd be great. And we want to be sure to try to get not only at a greater understanding of the challenge, but also what some solutions might be. Sir.
Sure. Thank you. Is this on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for your time. And my question is, you mentioned mobile may not be a solution, and then laptops are becoming ever so cheaper. But what about tablets? And I'm holding a tablet in my hand, which it's manufactured in China. It's got quad core. It's fast. It does everything that an iPad does. But this one in my hand is $40.
Right.
Literally is $40. And with the Bluetooth keyboard, I've got a hybrid. So question, why not use the tablets as a solution for the devices?
Right.
And make it cheaper?
Mr. Reed.
Certainly, that's something that can be done. In fact, I don't advocate any particular device, but I do think that particularly for kids who are in school, they have to have something with a keyboard in order to do the things that they need to turn in and that sort of thing. HISD, for instance, is doing all of their assignments online, turning them in online, and so you have to be able to manipulate a keyboard.
It's, again, I think we all talked about this, it's not the device that's the issue, it's the connection that's the issue.
Yeah.
You talking about, you come out to East Side, you come out to Southwest, where my neighborhood is, everybody has a phone. Everybody can, people have tablets and stuff. They just don't necessarily have broadband. They might have a tablet that they only use at school when they have Wi-Fi at school. That's not a problem. Tablets, it's like you said, it's $40. They can go find, use one, they can, whatever else. The problem is when they get home, they're for the next 12 hours in a dead space.
50% of the houses in our neighborhood do not have.
Why Representative Wu, or really to anybody in the panel, why are not, some cities provide the equivalent of free Wi-Fi.
That's what I've been wanting to talk about.
Why don't more cities provide free Wi-Fi? That would solve some of this, if not a lot of this problem.
I think for one, I think the industry is very wary of it because we've just come from an era of deregulation. If even though it's not the state or not the feds, but it's a city government that's now putting their hands into the arena. I think there's a lot of corporations that are very we're not really sure about that, and they lobby against it, and they put money against it. Right. And I'm not sure if Texas has a law against it. I haven't looked at that closely, but I know others.
Actually, in 1995, there was a period of time when we were getting ready to open a Wi-Fi network in East Houston with Rice University, and we put an antenna on a public library in the neighborhood, and there was a lot of interest in Austin in trying to ride out that capability for us to put that antenna on the library.
Who was lobbying against?
The internet providers.
Right. So you have this double whammy of they can't build a business model for, let's say, I don't know, Podunk, Texas, to have their municipal ISP. They can't make a business case for them to go out there, but they'll also lobby against that city from forming their own. And I think that's one thing.
Sort of the old, if I can't have you, nobody can.
Right.
Kind of
well, because the political fear is pretty obvious. Like if they start, then what's going to stop everyone else from doing it? And why wouldn't Houston just have their own competing ISP in Houston? I think Will and I actually have talked about this in the past. That if we can have a provision that says, look, if you have an area that either can't afford it or is unwilling to afford it or is not practical for you to be out there, then carve out that area and say this is a dead zone, and the city may now operate in this area, and no one, and it's go, but the city cannot extend beyond that.
Right. But the point is, there's a way to mitigate any concerns.
Right.
You could if you wanted to.
I think, but the political aspect of it is they want to kill everything.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir.
Yes, Scott Dixon with the City of Flatonia. First, I want to thank your panelists and you for offering this free service to us.
Sure.
A little bit of a haul from Flatonia to get here, but I'm glad that I was able to do that. And thank you to
I
Becky
hope
and Will.
I-10 was free today, I hope.
Yes, yeah. No
71
exodus
was
today.
not free. I-10 was free, but that's another conversation. Go ahead.
Again, I want to thank specifically Becky and Will for their efforts to help our county
Sure.
struggle with some of these things. Y'all touched on economic development, and I feel like that's worthy of revisiting, especially with some of your just recent comments about cities getting involved in providing
Right.
internet access. We just got through funding as a state our highway systems at an unprecedented level, which personally I support. But I think that in terms of economic development, as important, or possibly even more important, is the funding of internet access. Cities, large and small, will shrink or grow depending on their access to internet. And that is going to be more important than being able to get to your job site in the future. We're already seeing that with tablets and devices, et cetera. So when is the state going to get serious about addressing that issue? And that's really important in the context of the global, the worldwide issues. You mentioned, Mr. Wu, that they had, if you look at India and China and everywhere else, what they're doing from internet access, but it's not just what they're doing, it's also their populations are overshadowing our own. So this is a very real threat to the livelihood and welfare of the United States.
I'm intrigued by this idea, Representative Wu, that connecting cities by roads is so last century, when in fact we possibly have to be connecting communities by virtual networks that would allow for, right?
Fiber in the right-of-way.
Right?
No, absolutely. I don't think. Here's the reality of it. Here's the reality of what this comes down to. Is there a big lobby to build roads?
Sure.
Yeah. Is there a big lobby for cities to put together internet? No.
You're bumming me out, Representative.
I'm here to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want me to lie to you, I'm happy to do that.
Right, but one would imagine that there would be a lobby in favor of broadband access because the broadband providers would be theoretically all excited about the possibility of all these new customers. I mean, that's simple-minded, but it is what it is, right? That would be the calculation.
I mean, I think if the state's willing to chip in money to
Right.
do the hard infrastructure, like literally laying down fiber from here to Flatonia, whatever it is, I think the providers say, okay, now we can go out there.
Right.
I think that's reasonable.
The reality is, Ms. Garlick, that if there are more roads constructed between the big cities and Schulenburg, that's a good thing. But if you get to Schulenburg on these new roads and there's still a lack of economic opportunity, it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory.
That's true.
I mean, Flatonia may substitute in this case for Schulenburg in this conversation.
That's true.
Yeah.
We're looking for innovative ways to bring business to our area. And one of the things that we've done in conjunction with Connected Nation, Connected Texas, is to bring, for example, a call center training to our campus. So being connected by internet, broadband, helps us bring these businesses or bring these business opportunities and jobs
Right.
to our county. Whereas we already have roads. While roads bring a lot of people through there, they don't necessarily bring jobs there.
Right. Excellent. Other questions? Ma'am. Yes.
Hi, thank you guys for being here. I don't have a question, but I do have a solution to the problem.
Okay,
and
go.
One of the things that Comcast has done is we saw that there was a disparity in between people that the haves and the have-nots, the people that do have internet access at home and the ones who do not. So we did come up with a program that's called Internet Essentials, and it is for families who do not make enough to afford internet access in their homes. We've made it affordable for families that are on free or reduced lunch. they can purchase internet through Comcast for $9.95 a month. And we partner with HISD on their Power Up program, and we do participate in their Power Up program, and we go and we speak at their Power Up meetings to let parents know about internet essentials and
So-
that it is affordable for them.
So this is a case where obviously, again, in the right circumstances, good civic actors, if they can't give it away, can at least make it available for.
I'm very appreciative because Comcast came out to my community last year. They hold an event out there about once a year. They give away a bunch of free laptops, and they provide this really good service. It's not like a super high speed connection,
Right.
But it's
a
what you
start.
need. It's a very good start. It's all you need for a household. I mean, you probably can't like really watch a lot of HD Netflix on it, but
Actually, we did increase the speed this year.
okay, well there you go.
We've increased the speeds this year, and we do have Wi-Fi on the routers now.
There you go.
So we
Very
make
well.
enhancements to the program each year.
Ma'am, let's be sure we get your question in too. Go ahead before we run out of time. Yes.
I want to thank you once again for putting this panel together.
Sure thing, yes.
It's been very enlightening to me, and I have to say I'm very encouraged, especially with what Dr. Wu said about his ideal of, seeking connectivity for everyone.
Right.
Because I think that's really where we need to be focused. Thank you once again.
Yeah.
Appreciate the promotion too.
Yeah, well, I've been listening.
You have a question.
Well, I've been listening to this panel. We've touched upon broadband access to address education, employment, government involvement, and I think you touched very briefly on telemedicine. I work in a healthcare agency that mainly serves the indigent.
Yes.
And beyond telemedicine, what we have to do is get down to the very basics, where people who don't have means, who are indigent, those single-parent families, those children who aren't insured, to be able to simply access government services that exist, such as Medicaid and Medicare. And that's where I'm seeing a huge lack, because everything has gone, we have our state government,
Right. Well, in fact, that's sort of to Representative
Right.
Wu's point, that the challenge of
Exactly.
interacting with your government, which would extend into what this questioner was asking.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many homes that I go into where, not only is there not a computer, there's definitely not internet access. And if I use my computer and try to maneuver, a lot of times the systems are so poorly developed at the state level that it takes hours and hours and sometimes weeks and months to be able to get somebody enrolled, in Medicaid and Medicare. And I appreciate Comcast that's reaching out to provide for those children who are already receiving free lunches and who are enrolled in Medicare. But we have a huge number of people who aren't even receiving free lunches that they need.
Well, it's an
and
extremely
medical care that they
important
need,
point.
because they can't because they don't have internet access. And if you don't have internet access, that person, and I'm here to tell you, because I'm frustrated, I will sit with that family while we're on hold for hours to reach somebody at the state level so we can fill out an application over line, only to be told that their system is down.
It's a hugely important point. If you don't have a question, I want to be sure we let the person right behind you
Now,
come on.
my question is, how can we give those people a voice? What can we do to give that population a voice? Because we live in a state that just rejected $100 million from the federal government.
Ms.
to
Budd,
expand
you're
Medicaid.
focused in large measure on many of the communities that the questioner is referring to. So how do you give those people an opportunity to have their voices heard?
So what we do in Austin is we partner with many social service agencies, about 30, and when Will and I were a part of the Broadband Technology Opportunity Grant, we deployed computers to those 30 sites, and so our constituents come in, and when we had BTOP funding, we also provided people to help them with the process of going online.
What about the disabled?
Disabled,
We
have
set up disabled
keyboards.
units in each of those sites.
Every site had a disabled site. So partnering and collaboration is essential. We're not going to solve this problem again by ourselves. It's that village.
We have to
And
work
so
together.
Find a friend and say, we can't afford to buy computers. Let's get two together and then ask a foundation to match it. Start at the grassroots level, because nothing's going to happen if you keep talking about a problem and asking funders to solve it. Let them see the outcomes of your work and the impact of your work. Tell that one story about that one family, and I think you may get some leverage.
Representative.
No, and grassroots is exactly right. And here's the thing, what it comes down to is, are voters mad about it?
Yeah.
You know, when the roads are bad, you know, I mean, I have little ability to actually go fix the roads myself. I mean, other than complain to TxDOT or to the city, but I get tons of mail about the roads, and people will get upset about it.
Right.
Nobody contacts me about internet access because I think people who don't have it don't know to ask for it, and they're not mad about it.
And so in the end, you're going to respond to what you hear about.
Right, and then once people start getting mad about it, then it'll start becoming better.
We have time for one
That's
more.
why as she comes up, that's why one of the things we want to do is put together technology plans for specific communities that include all those parts of the three-legged stool, the devices, the access,
And the training.
technology, and the training,
Right.
so that we can help people understand the value of these tools and help them begin to access those tools and help them be civically engaged.
Perfect. Last question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to make a quick comment.
Sure.
I work for Harmony Public Schools, and we recently received a grant for Race to the Top. They gave our students Chromebooks to take home and to use at
Chromebooks,
school,
yes.
a student
Okay.
laptop. And I would just want to make a comment that, you know, without the holistic approach and having the connectivity, it did not work out, you know? The first 2 years, the students had the laptops, but we didn't have the internet, you know, good internet access. And so they would log onto their modules, they would do their assessments, but they kept getting, you know, a busy signal or, you know, just bad connection. And,
Right.
and they would kind of give up and just get frustrated. So I just wanted to make, you know, a comment and say that it's true. It's
A real world
yeah.
example.
Yeah,
Very
thank
good.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, when the kids go home in the neighborhood where our office is, 50% of them, even though they have a laptop,
Can't get access to it.
And that's what we've been saying all along about education, that you have to look at education from a holistic model.
Right.
And you can't just talk about, hey, do you have good teachers? But you have to talk about, do you have food at home? Do you have a safe place to live?
Yep.
Do you have, not just, here's a laptop,
Yeah.
then you should be
And
making A's
then
now.
problem solved, right. What a great conversation we've been able to have today. I want to thank Houston Community College for hosting us, Comcast for providing us the sponsorship to make this event free for all of you and for everybody on the live stream. Thank you all so much for coming. Please join me in thanking Juanita Budd, Becky Garlick, Will Reed, and Representative Jean Wu. We'll see you again. Thanks very much.